Hi everyone, welcome to the first lesson for our ECE discrete class. These video lessons are intended for you to use as you feel like. Could be for if you're absent and want to go over a lesson, or even if you were in class and you would like to just go over a lesson again, you're studying for a test, or just would like to review some material, however that you like. Um, and since this is on my YouTube channel, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Oh, I feel like such a one of those YouTube influencers, but feel free to subscribe to my channel and you'll never miss a video that I post. All right. Um, Thank you for watching, and hopefully I will keep this as short as possible without all the crazy things that you may see in class. Okay. And just hope that it works out well for you. Okay, so here we go. Okay, let's close this and erase this. Okay, our first section that we'll use here is on plurality and runoff elections. So this is just kind of an introductory lesson, very simple stuff, but a couple quick applications that we'll use of this. This is all based around the very first thing that we talk about in this class, and that is how do we determine the winner of an election. Now, we are pretty familiar with how that happens. Winner of election, usually most votes, right? So person with the most votes wins. Now, that could lead to some interesting situations, right? And you'll see those happening in a little bit. The other question is then, can a winner be different based on different levels of criteria? Yes, otherwise we wouldn't be having this discussion, but some of you know a few other things, different ways that elections can be run, and we'll talk about all of them and what they mean. But for now, we're going to focus on this idea of this word called a plurality. Plurality means most votes. So a candidate who has a plurality of the votes has more votes than any other candidate in that election. And that seems the most obvious, but there's always a little bit more to the story than that, right? Okay. Um, First off, this does go beyond politics. As we've said in class, while politics is a big part of this, we vote on lots of things. Anytime we have to make a choice where a group of people is able to put forth their opinion, then that is considered an election. When one choice receives more than 50% of possible votes, they're said to have a majority. The big point here, okay, is more than 50%, and that is strict. So the one thing that you want to keep in mind here is that let's say that you have an election with, if you have 60 voters, okay, 60 voters, how many voters would you need for a majority? That's 31 for a majority, not 30. You need 31 because at 30 you would have, possibly a 30-30 tie, and that's not a clear winner. A clear winner would happen when one candidate has 31 of the votes, which is more than 50%. That's easy to do when there's an odd number. So obviously, if there is 61 voters, 31 would also be enough for a majority. Um, so something to keep in mind is that when you have an odd number of voters, then because it's impossible to tie, then it's easy to figure out a majority. Okay? So an easy way to think about it, there actually is a formula for majority, and that formula looks like this. So it is the number, if you have the total number of voters, okay, and you take the total number of voters, you divide by 2, and you add 1/2, and then you round down. These funky little symbols here mean round down. That always works. Conversely, you could take the number of voters, add 1, divide by 2, and then round the result down. And that works too. That's kind of above and beyond, but just thought I'd share that piece of information. In any election in which there's 2 choices or 2 candidates or 2-party system, the choice with the majority is the clear winner. There's no other way that you could determine, like in that case, when there's only 2, there's really no way to consider the person with the lesser votes as any better. Okay, with 3 or more choices, the water becomes much murkier since it's entirely possible that no choice gets 50% of the votes. You'll see that coming up in a bit, but this happens a lot. Actually, this happens in many presidential elections as well. So, for example, you have a case where you get like 40, not one candidate gets 48% of the vote, another one gets like 44% of the vote, and then a third candidate gets 8% of the vote. Like that can happen. So that can happen. And in that case, when the top vote getter is still under 50%, we call that a plurality. Really, anytime they win, it's considered a plurality. But we use this term specifically when it's still under 50, because otherwise we would just call it a majority, and that's a stronger term. Okay. And I suppose still I would say at or under 50%. So whenever they don't have a minority, or sorry, majority. Okay. So the plurality method of actually voting on election is as simple as what you think it is. Given a ballot, voters select one choice and one choice only. The choice with the most votes wins. Brutally simple. Nothing involved except common sense. Most, but not all, elections for office in the United States are done this way. There are certain states that do it differently, notably Maine and California. Maine and California and Georgia. Georgia is the big one that was in the news this year. Georgia has what's known as a runoff election, which we'll talk about in a bit. And that's because in the run for Senate seats, in the run for their Senate seats, there was about, I forget which candidate it was, but one of the 2 Georgia senators, there was about 20 candidates vying for that position, and then they select 2 to do a final vote. And so that was the vote that took place, I believe it was in January. And so we'll talk a bit more about that when that comes up in a bit. Okay. Next. All right. So here's definitely a case we can talk about. So we had some people that decided that they wanted to vote unfavored ice cream, right? A block and B block. This is from last year or 2 years ago. I want to say this was 2 years ago. And then you had the choices of chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, and mint. Now, in this particular case, all the directions I gave them was, those are your 4 choices. Please vote on your favorite flavor of ice cream. In A block, I had one person write in Neapolitan, which is the combination of chocolate, strawberry, vanilla. And I had one person writing cookie dough, which was an interesting situation. And there's a story behind that one, and because that particular kid kept voting cookie dough on everything after that, and it got kind of hilarious. But anyway, let's take a look at the totals here. There is 24 people here. Okay, so here we have 24. So we had 24 people in that one particular class. Over here, there's 20. In B block, you'll notice nobody voted for anything crazy except for one person had a vote that I was unable to count. Their work was either, I forget the reason, it's like sloppy, illegible, they did not follow directions on the ballot correctly, whatever the case have you, that vote did not count for whatever reason. So in this particular case here, A block, who's the winner? Mint, definitely the winner, but it's only a plurality. In order to have a majority, how many votes would they need? They would need 13 votes. Half of 24 is 12, and then go up to the next vote. So that is 13. So now what we can do is look at B block, and you'll notice in this case it's a tie. No person. Here's an interesting case. Which one wins? Well, it's a tie between chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla, and none of them have more than 25% of the vote. So here's an interesting situation. Let's look at chocolate, right? Let's say this is a little different, very evenly split, but let's say this happens. Let's say one person was actually chocolate and not a strawberry. So let's say the vote looks like this. So chocolate would win in this situation with 6, but guess what? 6 out of 20. It's only 30%. So let's say you're planning an ice cream social, right? And you want to go with whatever is voted the most as ice cream to bring to the social. So chocolate wins the vote, but guess what? Only 30% of the people actually like chocolate ice cream. It could be more. There may be people that are okay with it, but there are only 6 of the 20 people that said that chocolate is their favorite or that they would prefer it. That means there's 70% that don't prefer chocolate, even though it's a winner. So not a very strong winner. So there's potentially 70% of people that aren't happy with these results. That could be bad, especially if you have a contested election in some country. Having 70% of your population unhappy with the election would be very, very bad. All right. Now, let's say we pick something here. Now let's go back here and let's say it turns out we go with mint, right? But they're out of mint. Okay, how do we handle this situation? Well, probably the easiest thing to do, we have 2 choices, right? We can either go with second choice. That's one option. Or another option that's a little bit costlier, you vote on remaining. Which is better? Well, depends on choices, right? You can go with your second choice if you feel like that's going to be okay, like there's another ice cream that people will be okay with, and if you don't have a lot of time. Revoting is costly, takes time, but you will likely get better results, right? Because you'll know of the remaining what people truly feel like. If you just go with people's second choice, yeah, you could just immediately do it, but you run the risk of people being unhappy. And certainly here, second choice, vanilla. I mean, 7 out of 24 is what? 7 out of 24, just over 25%. Okay, so you're looking at roughly the same 30% happiness there. So again, maybe not good. So maybe revoting is the best situation there. If you can, costly, but effective. And that's important. And that's actually what a lot of places will do when this sort of situation comes up. Okay, so we redo the votes, and now in class we'll probably redo this vote, but we don't have to worry about it here. Okay, So the next thing, now that's just kind of an introductory. Clearly, again, it's a simple way to run an election, right? Now let's take a look at some of the applications that we can do. Um, One of the things that is important for us to be able to figure out is um, how many um, votes would it take for us to be comfortable to win, or in this case, guarantee a win. Here's a situation where plurality data can help us. Suppose 90 votes have been cast in an election and we have four candidates. They're Smith, Jones, Brown, and Ladd. Four people, four elections, no, sorry, four candidates. After 55 votes have been counted, this is the standing. Okay, so 55 votes are cast, which means there are 35 to go because there's a total of 90 votes. 55 votes have been counted, so here's the counting so far, and this adds up to 55. So the question is, what is the minimum number of votes that Jones needs to guarantee a win? Ooh, interesting question. So um, obviously, if Jones gets all the rest of the votes, all 35 votes, he wins, right? Likewise, if he has, if a bunch of votes go to Ladd, Jones will likely still win, right? What is the minimum number of votes Jones needs to guarantee a win? Okay, if you want to figure it out for yourself, if you want to give it a go, try pausing it here before I go over the answer. Okay, and I'll even give you a hint too. So before I go into the answer, here's another hint to do. Because we're looking for the minimum number of votes to guarantee a win, we only care about the most likely person to catch him. And in this case, that's Smith. So Brown and Ladd, even though it is possible for them to win, the problem is because those likelihoods are lesser, um, if we know that the choice is one of those, then Jones would need a lesser amount of votes in order to win. But um, we want to know at what point would we guarantee that even Smith is out of the running. Okay. All right. So you ready? If not, you can pause it here. All right. Let's take a look. So the way that you want to look at it in trying to figure this out, you want to know at what point 35 votes, right? You want to know at what point um, Jones is guaranteed to win. So here's the deal. What you don't want to have happen is for Smith to catch up, right? But let's assume that's the worst case scenario. If we're looking for the minimum number of votes, then all the worst case scenarios happen. And that means that Smith catches up to Jones. And so that's 7 votes. So Smith needs 7 votes to catch up to Jones. After that, Smith needs to get more votes than Jones does. That's the only way he's going to win. Okay? Um, so in that particular case, if Smith does get those 7, right? So let's say Smith gets those 7, then 62 votes have been counted, and it's a 22-22 tie. Um, and then at that point, 28 more votes have to be counted. Okay. So in order for Smith to win, he's going to need 7 more votes to catch up to 22. And then he's going to need a majority of the rest. So of those 28, they need 15 more for a victory. So that's a total of 22 votes. So 7 plus 15 is 22. At 21, they would tie. So again, we're assuming at the moment, worst case scenario, no votes go to Brown and Ladd. If votes start going to Brown and to Ladd, then that's going to make Jones' path to victory much easier. Okay. So what we need to, in order for Smith to win, he would need 7 votes, right? Plus 15 more. So that's a total of 22. Um, and at 21, they would tie. So, but if we're guaranteeing victory, we're also going to consider a tie too. As long as Smith doesn't get 21 of those votes, then Jones would absolutely win. So remember what happens if Smith gets 21, and then the remaining group, so that would be 14. Okay, 14 votes, the remaining 14 votes would go to Jones. And in that particular case, we would have a 36-36 tie, right? So as long as Smith doesn't have that, then we're good. That means Jones needs 15 votes to guarantee a victory. As long as Jones gets 15 votes. So let's erase this here and show you. So if we have 15, okay, and we'll do this here, put this here. If Jones gets 15 more, he's going to now have 37 votes. Then there's 20 more votes. And it doesn't matter who they go to, Jones will be guaranteed a victory at that point. So that's really one way to look at it. There's several other ways that you can look at this, but it's just figuring out at what point do we guarantee a victory. And the key here to look at is a majority. So what we do is we look at a tie. Oops. We figure out how many votes are needed to get to a tie, and then at that point, we look at a majority of rest. So any problem that looks like this, there are 2 parts. How many votes are needed to get to a tie, and then what are the majority of the remaining votes? And that will usually answer questions of this form. So we'll continue practicing ones like this. Okay, hope that makes sense. Now this can also be done with algebra. Again, worst case scenario, all votes that don't go to Jones go to Smith. Again, because he's the one that's the closest, that's the worst case scenario. If any votes go to the other 2, Brown or Ladd, then we have less, then Jones would need less votes. Okay, so then X votes are needed to be cast in order for them to tie. So at this point, Jones had 22, right? Plus some value of X equals 15 plus 35 minus X. And so in this particular case here, what we do is we're going to actually not make this an equal sign. We're going to make this a greater than sign because we want Jones to have more votes than Smith. So if this algebra statement makes sense, Jones 22 votes plus some remaining votes, it must be greater than Smith's 15 plus the remainder of those 35 votes. Okay? All right, and when you solve this equation, you can solve this equation that becomes 50 minus X. On that side, greater than 22 plus X. What happens is you then can add an X to both sides, and you get 22 plus 2X is greater than 50. So 2X is greater than 28. And then X must be greater than 14. So as long as X has 15 or more, right? Because remember, decimals don't count here. So as long as Jones gets 15 or more of the votes, we're good. Okay. So you can solve this with algebra or by thinking logically. Okay. All right, folks. The next piece now that we're going to talk about is something that you probably saw in real life here. And this is called a runoff system. A runoff happens in some systems when no candidate receives a majority of votes. Candidate or candidates with the lowest vote totals are disqualified. The vote is held again with fewer candidates and repeat until one candidate has a majority. Generally speaking, in most public elections, the runoff is between the top two candidates, so only to require a maximum of 2 votes, the original one plus what they call the runoff vote. This happened in Georgia, as we said before. In Georgia, this was in the news because the Senate races this year were so closely watched. On election day, so I forget what, so in November on election day, they voted on the original group of candidates. And so the original group of candidates was about 20 people, right? And they vote, and like the top vote getter only had like 19% of the vote at most, maybe even less than that. So they took the top 2 candidates and ran them against each other. And I don't remember which one of, there were 2 Senate races, obviously, one of which only had a couple of candidates and the other one had 20. And I don't remember which was which. So that's the one I'd have to look up. But this happened in January. They figure out which 2 candidates have the most votes. And in January, and I believe it was January 5th was that big election day, right? They did the runoff. And they voted on just the 2 candidates. And so that guarantees a majority. The reason why they do this system is, that gives more candidates a chance and really, let the people decide who their favorites are. And then they say, okay, now between this smaller group of favorites, now make a decision. And that way, people have a chance to vote for a lower candidate if they think maybe they have some possibility of winning. And it allows people to really kind of, they can vote for candidates that they feel strongly about, even if they don't think they have a chance in winning. People are a little bit less pressured at voting for a popular candidate. If we did this in a regular election, like Maine does, okay, Maine does this actually, and whereas in most states, like a third party for the general president election, usually 3 to 5% of people will vote for the third party. In Maine, it's like 15% because they'll do a runoff. And but that's a slightly different runoff system that we'll talk about. And so there's a lot more interest in third party candidates up there because they run this sort of system where people feel more empowered and they're encouraged to vote for a third party in this way. Okay. Now, it's impossible to make predictions about runoff outcomes, right? Just based on the original election, unless we have the voters' ranked choices. This is the main system here. Does this. In Maine, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit on my lecture before. In Maine, what they do is they rank the candidates. So they'll put Trump and Biden and the third candidate, which I can't remember for the life of me who the third party candidate was. They didn't have a very good showing. But they'll put, the Democratic, the Republican, the third party candidates all on a ballot, and they'll let them rank them, first choice, second choice, third choice. And so you get a case like this, right? All right. So let's take a look at this chart. How should we modify? So here's a question that's asked. How should we modify the level of career counseling services? So we have a couple choices. So voters can either expand services, decrease services, or maintain. So when you read a chart like this, the idea is that you can vote for um, you can rank them first, second, or third, right? So the way that you read this chart, 37% of the possible voters um, can go either first, second, or third choice. All right, so 37% of the voters voted to expand first. That was their first choice. Then maintain, and then decrease. 23% of the voters, and you think of this as percentages here, right? So 23% of the voters said that they would decrease services and then maintain and then expand afterwards. This would be their last choice. So maybe these people did not like expansion. These people did like expansion. 21% of the voters said, no, we'll maintain. And then they said, no, we will maintain, but if we can't maintain, we prefer to expand or decrease. 19% of the voters said the opposite. While they want to maintain services, they'd be open to decreasing rather than expanding. So they were given a list of options and they were able to put them in this order. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, how do we use this table? Okay, who wins in the plurality? Maintain does, right? 40% of the votes. So let's look at the chart here. Right here, maintain. These two groups together, both of these groups voted first choice was to maintain, right? And that's a total of 40%. So 40% of the people altogether would vote to maintain. So if this were a plurality election, okay, we can expect that instead of a ranked choice, if this was simply what would you like to do, 40% of people would vote for maintain. We can expect that if people voted this is their first choice here, then this is what they would vote for in a regular general plurality election. And we're going to assume that people don't change their minds in between, right? It's possible, but it's highly unlikely, usually. Okay, who wins in a runoff with the top two choices? Okay, all right, so let's look at a runoff, right? So in a runoff, okay, the lowest vote total is eliminated. Okay, in this particular case, who has the lowest? So maintain was 40. Now expand, 37% of the people said that they would rather expand, and 23% said that they would decrease. So guess what? Decrease is off the table because only 23% of people prefer to decrease services. Okay, now here's the thing. Now let's look at a runoff, right? Suppose then we were to take these values and we were to simulate a runoff. Okay, now again, we don't know what people will actually do when we vote a second time, but psychology says that people are generally, pretty, um, pretty predictable. And if they do something once, they'll do it again. So what's going to happen in that case is, if these 37% of people voted to expand on the first ballot, and if there's no pressuring or anything, likely they're going to vote expand again on a second ballot. Same thing with these people. If these people said maintain on the first ballot, on the second ballot, they'll vote to maintain. Now, the people who voted decrease, guess what? That's no longer on the ballot. So what's going to happen? Now, on this ranked choice, all these people who voted to decrease, right? They're going to say, you know what? If we can't have a decrease, at least let's keep it the same. And that makes total sense, right? They're not going to suddenly go from decrease to expand when they could simply maintain services. So those people are likely going to vote to maintain. They're going to switch to their number two choice. And that's what happens, using ranked choice voting. Maine does this too. With a presidential election, they don't have people vote a second time. What they do is they get rid of the lowest vote total. So in a presidential election, it'll be like Democrat, Republican, third party candidate. So what winds up happening is they'll tally all the votes. Then they will drop the lowest vote total, which is usually the third party, and then go to their second choice. Um, so the results are essentially identical to what would happen in a regular vote. The only difference being it encourages people to vote for third parties, and I think that's a pretty good thing. So what's going to happen? In a runoff, okay, the 23% that voted for decrease would likely vote for maintain in the runoff. So maintain will still win with 63% of the votes. But here's the difference. Maintain in a plurality, 40% of the votes. Who wins in a runoff? Maintain still wins, but this time you have 63%. So it's a stronger win. Runoffs do that. Runoffs, because it forces a majority, you get a stronger win. And so now you have a stronger reason to believe that that's really the way that should be going, and that that's going to be a choice that people will be okay with. All right, folks. There are a few other choices that we can do. There'll be some homework problems, I'm sure. I may go with these homework problems, or I may go with different ones, but definitely talk to me to know what it is, okay? But there you go. Just wanted to go over that. I hope this is somewhat informative, and have fun, folks.